Welcome everybody, I'm Keegs, and over the last 120 hours I put into Elden Ring, I've mostly been using the Sorcerer build, and I wanted to talk about my thoughts specifically for PvE, but I imagine some of this would also translate over to a PvP setting as well. We'll start off with the pros of this class, and first off, I think the animations for the sorceries are just awesome. They're all so unique and I feel really elegant every time I cast one. I like how they kind of color-coded the different types of magic too, for things that do different kinds of damage, like magic damage versus physical damage versus frost damage, etc. As a ranged character, it helps in so many situations I couldn't possibly name them all, but because of the verticality of this game, you often find yourself on high ledges where enemies can't reach you, and you're able to just rain down spells and take out threats like they've never even had a chance to be threatening to you. There are lots of spells that cast really quickly, which I thought was a big relief coming from Dark Souls 3, where spells took ages to cast. So I kind of felt like you could play a more battle mage style where you used a sword often interweaving spells. But now let's move on to the cons, since I feel like I'm going to be able to talk a little more in depth about the things I didn't like quite as much, opposed to the things that I did really like. And jumping off from my last point about playing as a battle mage, it is possible, but honestly it's not super practical. Because as a sorcerer, you need high FP and intelligence. It doesn't allow you to put many points into vigor and endurance if you're trying to really stay under the general 150 rule of thumb for PvP. This means you're probably pretty squishy. So you're not going to want to trade blows very often, and you also can't really have a shield because you've got your staff and there isn't a ton of protection you can give yourself, and you have a sword in the other hand, so, you don't have anything to block incoming damage very well. Though I guess you could do a staff and a shield instead, but that seems kind of crazy to me. What if you run out of FP, or what if there's an opening with just one last hit and you can't get to it since you've got no weapon? Seems a little risky to me, but I don't know, I guess what's more risky, having a shield or having a sword? So instead you end up hanging back and casting spells a lot more, and because of it you become a full-time ranged sorcerer instead of that traditional battle mage vision. Of course there's no hard limit, and if you want to keep leveling up so that you can get better gear and have higher HP, you can certainly do that, but if you also want to level up to level 200 to do this, you're going to be in the super late game once you finally get there. You've probably already completed the game, so why even work towards that if it's just for some PvP reason? But again, that's a weird level to be for PvP, so it just doesn't seem really practical to do that either. While it can be really fun to be the glass cannon as a sorcerer too, it makes many encounters a DPS race, and when you do that, you miss out on a lot of the mechanics of each boss. Often you'll burn them down before they get to a second phase, and can often trivialize encounters. Plus, you tend to always be at a distance, so many of their attacks couldn't hit you anyways. I didn't even use the OP Commonizor before the patch where it could basically one-shot most bosses. I just stuck to the good old rock sling, but even that almost felt like cheesing some bosses. That does bring me to the next point though, which is creating that distance in the first place. With most of these bosses, it's impossible to create any sort of distance. There are some of the most aggressive up-in-your-face bosses I've played in any Souls games. And that includes Sekiro, which is literally all about being up in your face in the encounters. Most of them can move to you at a lightning fast pace, or will instantly cast something as soon as you try to drink a potion or cast a spell from a distance, which means time for a spirit summon to take the heat off you. But this is where the balance comes into play, and is such a huge issue for this class, at least it was for me. Without a summon, I don't have a single moment to get a cast off, which makes the fights very, very tough. But with the summon, I generally never get aggroed, and now I'm free to cast as much as I like with no worries or threats. But remember, I'm a glass cannon, I do tons of damage, which means a lot of my encounters would look like this. Now I've gone from one of the hardest Souls games I've ever played to a mindless pressing LB a few times until the fight concludes. One of the easiest games I've played. So as a sorcerer, I found it really difficult to get the level of difficulty I was looking for in this game. It was either too hard almost to the point of feeling unfair, or too easy. The times it felt the most fair actually were the times where I was up against two enemies and I could call in a summon to distract one while I took on the other. Usually in the fights with multiple enemies, the enemies wouldn't be quite as aggressive, so it felt a little more balanced to me. I also wanted to use my little rock pebble more often, but the amount of enemies in this game that could easily avoid it made it so I had to really just rely on rock sling. It was one of the only spells that had good enough tracking to hit most enemies. I imagine in real PvP setting, it would also be way too easy to avoid all these attacks if even the NPCs in this game weren't having any problem. I will say though, that basically after I was done with the entire game, I learned that you could use night sorceries and enemies wouldn't dodge those, so yeah, I really wish I had known that a lot earlier in the game. I also found both of the spells that I used for most of the game in literally the first 20% of the game, and then never proceeded to find anything really better suited. So it was occasionally a little disappointing that I never felt like I was finding better spells as I got stronger and better. There were stronger things, but they either used so much FP for the damage it did, or they were just entirely uncontrollable. But maybe if I had known just how awesome the night sorceries were, I actually would have been a lot more excited every time I got them. Overall, I did enjoy my Sorcerer, and if you want to play a ranged character, I would definitely recommend trying a build like this. But if you think you could be a melee and a magic user, I think you might end up finding it a little tough to build a character that way. I want to know what you think though. Did you have a similar experience to me, or do I just need to get good at no summons? For now, I'm off to try another build and stay tarnished, my friends.